Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. Today I sat down with my friend Joe Tafur, and I met Joe a number of years ago. We were both working together in the Amazon at plant healing centers, both working with Shipibo. And Joe has a really interesting story. He's an American guy, Western trained doctor, and he came to plant medicine out of, to some degree, a need and a curiosity, and he really went really deeply into it. He ended up founding a center, went through a long apprenticeship program, training with Shipibo, learning how to do that work, and spent a number of years working in the Amazon. So he has a really unique perspective, a little bit of kind of both worlds, and he's a really good guy. I always really enjoy talking to Joe, and I think you guys will get a lot out of this podcast. As always, if you can go on YouTube and hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, that would really help with the algorithms, and also on Apple Podcasts, leave a star rating and a review. Also, it's a really big help if you can go on Patreon and support that way. Gives you a lot of benefits like early access to shows, Q&As, and I'm actually going to start putting the full versions of the show on Patreon. So most of it will be for free, but if you want to see the full version, you can go on Patreon and see it that way. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Joe. Recording.
Okay.
Cool, man. Well, it's good to see you.
That's good to see you too. You're out there, you're in Pisac or what? Is that what I'm seeing back there?
Yeah, that's right. What on, which is a little bit further down the road.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's been crazy. We've been pretty much stuck here for, 7 months now, ever since March when the lockdown happened. So it's been a long time.
That is a long time.
Yeah. And you're coming from Phoenix?
I'm in Phoenix right now. I'm in Arizona.
And that's where you're pretty much based now, yeah?
Yeah, I mean I'm based here. I haven't quite committed to. I like to be based here and travel from here. Is where I've been at. So I'm still moving around a little bit, but my main base is here.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cooling down right now, so that's the good thing.
Well, cool, man. So we met a number of years ago in the Amazon. We were both working at two different Amazonian plant healing centers, both with the Shipibo. And
yes.
you have a pretty unique background. So you're a medical doctor originally, and
yes.
I think I could be wrong. I think at the MAPS conference, I think you gave me a copy of your book and I read it, but it was a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And is it correct when you kind of came to plant medicine because you were struggling somehow in your path or in that path of being a doctor, and that's what kind of brought you down to the jungle?
Yeah, I in medical school I got kind of depressed and I was looking for help, and then I ended up coming back to Arizona, where I'm from, to go through peyote ceremony. So it was actually peyote ceremony that really turned me on to the potential for, plant spirit medicine healing. And so that's what I was really blown away by. And then because my family's from Colombia, I was aware of the ayahuasca, the yahe in Colombia. I was aware that existed. And I had kind of a lingering curiosity about that. And because of the significant healing I got with peyote, then I wanted to go and check it out. But I waited a while from the time I did peyote in 2001, maybe. And then I was still in my training. I had to finish my medical school, my family medicine training. So it wasn't until 2007 that I went to Peru for the first time to try ayahuasca.
So that's a fairly common kind of archetype, is people suffering from depression or anxiety or just kind of a general sense of something's not right. Was that kind of tricky for you coming from a medical background, and also what in the end made you come down to Peru? Because you do have Colombian background.
Yeah, well, it was because I had Colombia, the Colombian Amazon has always been kind of a hot zone. So it wasn't a major like tourist, although now, and there are people that do go, and there's always been people that go, but that region was kind of always considered a bit intense. And in particular, from a Colombian family, there's like extra tension of like, oh no, why would, we're not from that area. We don't have family from over there. They're having a lot of problems over there. You're American. Everybody can tell you're American. It's not safe for you to go there. So it stressed my grandma out for me to go to that region to do this, that was a factor in my world. And anyways, although I was interested and I continue to be interested, and I have had some experiences with Colombian shamans and things, and I like that, but I had read Jeremy Narby's book, The Cosmic Serpent, and I was very intrigued by what he was writing about. And I had an opportunity to meet him because a friend of mine was doing research in Switzerland and had become friends with him. And so I got to meet Jeremy Narby and talk to him about my interest as a doctor and what he was doing. And ultimately, since he had done his work in Peru, he recommended Peru as a place where I should go and try it. So I ended up in Iquitos partially for that reason. And then the other reason that I get into in my book is that a friend of mine, Kayvon, my good buddy, we had just finished all our family medicine residency, and he had done this big journey in his 20s from like Uruguay, Brazil, Uruguay, all the way around like to Iquitos. And he had this dream of going from Iquitos to the ocean to close this loop, to go down the Amazon River. And so I had told him that I wanted to try ayahuasca, and he had tried it when he went all that time ago. So he was like more, he was not afraid. He's like, oh no, we can do that stuff. And so I said, well, if you go with me to go drink ayahuasca, then I'll go with you down the Amazon. So we did that. We called that the Fellowship of the River, and that's why the book's called that. So we had this like 5-week adventure that was really just our celebration of finishing out the training, college, medical school, whatever, residency, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Your father was a doctor also?
Yeah, my father was a psychiatrist.
And
Yeah. Yeah, definitely into a related field.
Do you have any sense of what their thoughts or their reaction was when you started working with plants? Was that something? I mean, I'm sure being from Colombia, they were aware of that.
I would say shocked. My family's from Bogota, primarily from the mountains, and also with roots in like the valley below Bogota, which is, that's a hot area. There is some indigenous influence in that area for sure. But Bogota is in the mountains, it's just like Cusco. It's kind of like where you are right now. It's a cold, it's not breech cloths and canoes, it's a different vibe, and it's Andean. So they don't have direct familiarity with the Amazonian culture of Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my grandfather's best friend was a medical botanist from Colombia who had spent a lot of time in the Amazon. So there was this kind of like connection that way through the family, and that there were people in our circle that had that same curiosity, to be down there and explore with these cultures. So yeah, I don't think they knew what to make of it at the beginning. I did tell them that's where I was going the first time I went. And I had such a major experience that I felt compelled to tell them when I got back that I discovered something, and that I didn't know why, but I knew that I was going to go back again. Mm-hmm. And so they were just like, oh, what can you do? They didn't really know what it was, and it wasn't really too much. It was like, hey, you went there 5 days, and I went back for another 2 weeks. And the experience was even bigger. And So then I was really intrigued, and then I started bringing people down. And I brought a couple groups down. I spoke Spanish, and I was kind of, as a doctor, I was kind of getting in with the shamans, and they give you a deal. If you bring 10 people, you don't pay. So I was interested in that, and I was interested in seeing what they could do from what I saw them do with other people. And one of the people that came down in that group was my brother's father-in-law, who's very close with my parents. So that whole experience of him going down, and my dad as a psychiatrist observing that this person and kind of their transformation, was how we had a chance to kind of talk about that, that, whoa, what happened to him down there?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beginning of him and I speaking together about that, as two doctors in a way. And then he passed away, like a couple, like maybe 2 months later, my dad passed away. So then it was this transition of okay, I'm going to move home to Arizona from San Diego, where I was working, doing research, working as a doctor, to go help out my mom. And then that kind of freed me up in a way, because I left my research job, I left my doctor job, and I started trying to find part-time work in Arizona as a doctor. And so then all of a sudden I had this big flexibility, because I was at my mom's house and I had this part-time access to work. So then I started going down to Peru a lot more often, actually, is what ended up happening. And my dad died in 2009, and in 2010, talked to Ricardo about considering, helping to purchase some property to start a new center. And in 2011, Niue Rao opened. Yeah.
And so you said you had this kind of big experience, and then you came back and it was even a bigger experience.
Yeah.
Was there something in that experience that kind of shifted your perception that maybe something here was possible that you hadn't really maybe understood before in your traditional training?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I observed an extremely, number one, very advanced system in my estimation as a person, as a doctor. I'd been to some competitive universities in the United States, and had been, around some high level medical practice, and kind of understands that level of discipline and that level of training, and that kind of drive. And I saw readily that some of these Shipibo masters were definitely, was very impressed by their skills, knowledge, capacity. And so then in the ceremonies, and then their relationship with nature and the ayahuasca, was something I had never encountered. And the peyote ceremony, I only went I went to in Arizona, they have the peyote spirit walk, where you go by yourself and do it alone. And then I went to a couple of Native American church ceremonies where I kind of got to see a little bit of that kind of shamanic practice of okay, these people they're experienced with working with this plant energy and how to work with it in the space, and facilitate things and try to encourage things or inspire things. But what I saw with the Shipibos was more than I had ever seen before, as far as people working with energy, connection to nature, and the tangible consensus around that people were really experiencing these things and sharing, oh my God, did you see that? And then not only that, the wow factor, which is eventually is going to wear off, but just the results. I saw some people getting better from certain problems that I knew that we struggle with as North American doctors.
So when I met you, you're pretty much running Niue Rao. You were working in ceremony. You had a number of diets under your belt. what was that process like for you of kind of learning? Because essentially, I mean, you were in a sort of apprenticeship.
No, yeah, I did enter an apprenticeship. So it was a reluctant entrance. Like I definitely had intrigue into the apprenticeship um, as I was becoming very fascinated by the thing, and I felt like I had there was a very familiar kind of feeling in the ceremony space, and bringing groups down and being asked to help, with very little experience in the ceremony, and just feeling like, like I seem to have some familiarity with this. So I was drawn to it, but it also seemed crazy. Like, I'm not going to do that. You were exposed to that as well. Like this concept of a year-long Shipibo diet or 6 months or whatever it is, extended plant diet. It just seemed like something I didn't want to do. And where would that go? Like, what, I'm going to stop my life for that long, to do that. But then the center came along, and that just seemed like, yeah, I definitely want to do that. And so that was kind of like an opportunity where I could, at the beginning of New Way Route, we had multiple partners that were going to all take turns. It was like spread out among a lot of people, go down for a couple of months. What's the big deal? It's not very expensive to invest. And then a lot of people dropped out. And so it was just down to Ricardo, Svita, and I. And it started to become very clear that Ricardo was extremely serious about the project, and that, if we were going to participate in the project, it was going to be a full-time thing. So that kind of evolved, but I also was passionate about it and wanted to be part of it. It also seemed difficult for me to train in those circumstances, where you're running a center in the middle of the jungle, and dealing with the people there, like running the administrative side, whatever, making sure we have enough fish and toilet paper and all that kind of stuff, and the internet and everything, the employees, the staff, the management of the center. And then all the people coming and going and taking care of them and screening them and finding out what's going on, and then taking care of them while they're there. And then being asked to be in ceremony to help, to be present, to be there. So it was very, very, very intense period. And so I wasn't in a big hurry to train. I wasn't so sure, but Ricardo was very adamant that I would have to train, and that Svita would have to train for us to be part of the leadership of the center, that would not be acceptable. And to be in the ceremony, to help in the ceremony for all those different reasons. And so then Svita was very clear that she wanted to do that, but she was just trying to figure out how to juggle that, how to balance that with what we were kind of doing with our work. And so I don't know, it just came to a point where I finally decided, okay, I have to do it, I guess. I was doing like a month here diet, a month there diet, 6 months of this diet of light that had kind of come out that was not very, very restrictive. And then it just was, I don't know, it was the second or third year of New Way Rao where I was involved in the training of our dieters, but then they were starting to get frustrated. What about Joe? Like, when is he going to diet? How come I'm supposed to listen to him? And so then eventually, like, I entered my first, I did 6 months. I did 6 months of Piñon Blanco diet there. And it was very beautiful, amazing, but it was like kind of also devastatingly, intense. So at 6 months, I had lost a lot of weight. I was still riding a motorcycle into town, to take care of business all the time. Ceremony 4 nights a week, not necessarily drinking ayahuasca every time, but in there, dealing with stuff till whatever time in the morning and getting up and taking care of the business of the center. So it was just, I just told Ricardo, like, that's it. Like, I'm just going to do 6 months right now, because I think it's too much right now for me. And so I was with some other people like, no, let's just keep going. Let's just do the year. And maybe I could have, but at the time I felt like that was all I wanted to do. And I told them after that, like, if I'm running this place and doing all this, then from now on, like, I want to do 3 months. I'm not going to diet straight through like that. So
Mhm.
I did my year that way, broken up, which we had shamans that had trained that way, Shipibos that I had met. And so then I thought, okay, that's fine for me. And so I did, yeah. So then I was being asked to help in ceremony to increasing levels, including like eventually at some point when a shaman's sick and somebody has to sing to this number of people, like, okay, Joe, come in the rotation. But before that was also like, go sing to this person because they're not doing well, they're freaking out. We're not ready yet. Go take care of them. They need help, they need support early on or whenever that is. Go help them. So I was being asked to help at that level, and then eventually like I said, I would enter the rotation when they needed that level of support. So
Mhm.
that was like that was an honor for me, and it was an incredible opportunity, to work like that in that kind of circumstance, 4 nights a week, and to get that kind of experience and to have to be work alongside them and be able to compare notes and try to understand, how it all how to do it well.
Yeah. So, what would you say that process of dieting was like for you? Was it just kind of this general sense of cleaning, clearing, introspection, or did you have these aha moments where you realized something was happening, or it was more subtle?
Yeah, I would say for me it was more subtle,
Mhm.
and so there were moments, there were big dreams and a few big experiences along the way, but mostly subtle. So that's my personal experience. So when I see people going through, a lot of them have very big, experiences, or they're just more less subtle than what I experienced. But then I'm not, I don't know, I'm not really like affected by that because it's just like we'll see at the end, I guess. It's like it's might seem really flashy, but then when it comes time to help somebody else, that's really what the diet is. I
Mhm.
mean, for your own healing, and then for to learn medicine to help other people. So that's really where you see like what the person gained or did not gain from their process. So I think during it, it's very independent, it's very individual. And I think the Shipibos that I work with, I think for them in general is more subtle. That was the vibe I was getting. A lot of Shipibos were training alongside us to, some of the people who became the Shipibo, some of the Shipibo healers of the center, trained at the center. And so, I observed their process as well.
So, what was that process like for you to actually begin singing? Was that something that came to you in your diets, or was something that was
Yeah.
just kind of emerging in ceremony through working?
Yeah. I think for us, it was like there was a set goal that you're going to sing Icaro, by the time you're done dieting. So that's on your mind, you're thinking about that. So you're not, so there is the mystical side of it of like, waiting to receive this or however that is going to be received. And then there's a practical side where you have this opportunity there where it's like, oh, Ricardo has these CDs and some people have translated them. So you can start getting a feel for what are they singing about, and how do they structure what they're singing about. And so you could kind of come up with some phrases and some things that you would kind of have, to think about. And then for me, like the Shipibo Ikaro that I'm familiar with, there's different people that train in different ways, but with Ricardo, and I think in a lot of the ones that I've been exposed to, it's very unique to the person. In other words, there are songs, you do hear melodies and things that people do seem to carry on, like through their familial connections or their teachers or just that they like. But I think there's also an aspect of the unique song to the individual. And
Mhm.
so the idea is you're not trying to learn somebody else's melody, you're trying to find your own medicine. And so for me, the way that, I would hear again, like we were talking about the subtle versus not subtle, you hear somebody else, they're telling me that they just saw in their visions this thing just coming down the pillars of heaven, and to their ears or whatever, and they learned that way. For me, it wasn't like that, you know. For me, it was more like dieting 6 months, super busy all the time, you know. So you're just kind of hoping there maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe I'm too distracted with the work I'm doing. Had this dream, had that dream. I don't know, this happened, that happened. I'm not sure what's happening. And just like a little melody that I would just like doodle in my mind. And I was like, well, maybe it's that. That keeps coming to my mind. So why don't I just play with that? So then I'll just like, I would practice a little bit by myself or in our ceremony quietly, while they're singing, to explore a little bit. And then in our case, at the end of my 6 months, Ricardo obligated me to sing in front of everyone, at the end of the ceremony. They think, okay, you did 6 months after he closed my diet, he knows he closed my diet. Okay, let's see what you've learned. So that's the deal, It's like, it's this kind of subjective reality, I would call it, these things are there. It's like, is that person, I don't know, singing the blues or not? I guess who's the judge of that? And there's a lot of people, I guess, they claim that they say, yeah, that's it, or that's not it. And so in this case, it's that. And so I very shyly, was like, that was probably the biggest practice that I ever did, was right in that moment. And so then I tried to do it shy, and I talk about it in the book, and try to like just peter out and just hope that no, go, that's good, keep going. No, that's it, you're getting it, keep going. Until finally he pushed me over the edge of the cliff, and then it did start flowing. I started singing, and my voice was making sounds and things that I had never done before. People ask me about that. How do you know how to sing like that? That I sing sometimes with like multiple frequencies or something, like a throat sing or whatever that is, that sometimes you can handle, like, how do you do that? Or do you even know you're doing that? And I'm like, yeah, I don't. It's not from that kind of thinking about it. It's you're just letting it flow, the energy. And so that's where I really, in my personal experience, the diets are very real to me. And the way that it's shaped my singing in the ceremony is a dramatic difference. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but also to see, things in the visions while I'm singing to people also definitely changed with the diets.
So I think a lot of people listening to this, they probably worked with ayahuasca or different plants, so they're familiar with that. But there's also people who haven't. And right. To a lot of people, I mean, that would seem like a very foreign concept that a doctor, whether it's a Western doctor or a Shipibo doctor, is sitting in front of someone and actually singing them, and that's how they're healing them. How would you describe that process? How was that actually working?
Well, I would say, first of all, I don't blame them for doubting that. These things are like very hard to believe. If you haven't experienced it personally, then it is very hard to believe that, something like that. But many people have experienced different degrees of that, of some kind of energetic interaction between people, which is just part of everyday life, really at some common sense point that you realize that we affect each other, energetically. You might respond emotionally to somebody over the telephone, without touching them or even being in the same country as them. But it might make your stomach turn, it might make you break into a sweat. It might make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, just an interaction you have with somebody at work. So that there is such a thing, that we do affect each other that way. And then we have just the therapeutic, that people would actually practice being present for another person, listening to them in such a way that would help that person move forward in dealing with whatever they're dealing with, right? So some really great therapist, that somebody really excited to go see this great therapist, because they're just like, oh wow, to be careful. If you sit in front of them, they're gonna get it all out of you, And this idea of people getting, oh, that guy really pushes my buttons, or however you want to say it, so that people train in their ability to be there and to work with people. And furthermore, then you have the whole marketing sales world of like doing the same kind of thing to manipulate people, just to read all these cues off of them and get a sense of how you might be able to get at their subconscious, you know, and make them make irrational moves that maybe they're not so logically aware of, rationally aware of. So there's that. And then there's music, you know, there's music and all of its influence on us that, like, it's kind of a no-brainer, I think, that the music has an effect on people. And so that the entire rock concert is going to be under some kind of spell, you know, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people together in a certain vibe, you know, listening, enjoying, and getting taken on a journey by the song. You know, this journey of, like, whether that's the story of the song, some sad story, or, you know, that they end up processing something out personally as they go on that journey with this song. And so, you know, those are just a few examples of how, like, such a cultural practice would, like, have some kind of actual, wouldn't be so crazy to think that somebody could practice that and learn about that. Mm-hmm. And so then the icaro is a version of that, of where I'm sitting in front of somebody and both people are under the influence, in this case, maybe not every case, but in the example I'm speaking about right now. And so then, you know, I'm singing, and just then there's sound healing and frequencies and all that kind of stuff, and the way people are affected by that at different levels. So there's that element, but then there's just, like, the connection that the two people share, you know, having anybody sing to you under any circumstance. You know, how personal and intimate that can be. And in that intimacy, sometimes the things that might be revealed to the singer about the person, you know, as they kind of start getting into each other's internal worlds. So the icaro has to do with that kind of thing. So it's a very human experience. And so to be able to talk about that kind of thing, that it happens, that it occurs, that it exists, is kind of a vulnerable thing to talk about. So the easiest way to not be vulnerable is just to shoo that away. Oh, come on, give me a break. That's ridiculous. But, you know, if I get that person into a very vulnerable state, this hard-nosed, whatever, stubborn person, they start opening up to, man, would you sing to me? I really wish somebody would sing to me right now. You know, I'd feel really good if somebody would just sing to me. So it's beginning off of that stuff. And then now imagining that if somebody were to study such a process for thousands of years or centuries or generations, that you could really make some gains. Mm-hmm. And then you have to hear the people that go through it, you know? So it's like, we know that sounds crazy and that's weird. But then you hear all these stories and you could blow those stories off. But then it happens to somebody that you trust, you know? And all of a sudden you're like, you're a little more curious, you know? So it's not something you have to convince anybody of. Nobody should be convinced of that. There's no need for them to be convinced of that. But if they find themselves looking for that, it's like, yeah, there's people out there, they like that, they study that, they're passionate about that.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned this idea that the Shipibo system, I think you used the word scientific, and it's yes. Very old. And you also mentioned this idea that it's very effective in some of the things that perhaps allopathic medicine isn't so effective. It's also, I think, very interesting. Your father was a psychiatrist. What do you think that Shipibo system, or this way of working with plants, where do you think its efficacy lies? Like, what is it really able to do? And I mean, both coming from your medical training, but then also, I mean, you've probably worked with, you know, over 1,000 people now. So you've seen a lot of people go through that experience. So what do you think is really happening, and how is it benefiting people?
I think that's kind of like the theme of my book, is that exploration as a doctor to try to evaluate, you know, how is this treatment affecting people, and why are they getting something out of this that they're not getting from their own cultural, like, healthcare system. And I think that I think there's like two major things. Like the first one is Malidoma Somé, is an African healer and scholar that I like a lot. That he says his estimation of Western culture, one of these comments that he made was that there's really like three major things missing that were contributing to this mental health crisis in the West. He said it's just the human being, it needs like connection with nature. And as people disconnect from nature, then that's a source of illness. And that they need community. And it's normal, it's part of their normal biology to be in community. And when you pull them out of community, it's this possible source of suffering. And that they also need some form of spirituality, that they need to be able to access the mystery comfortably, like in a way that isn't somehow just treated as useless, So there's that side, which is kind of like a metaphysical, thing, I think. And then the way I kind of went with that, so I saw people going to Peru and coming to the centers like the temple or to us, just having a retreat in nature was like hugely impactful on them without even drinking ayahuasca or going to ceremony. And then being in a community of the people that live there and the locals who are so used to being in community and the villager kind of attitude and culture, and then everyone that's living there who's really just holding up this space for these people to heal. So to be in this community where everyone's actually encouraging you to heal. And then the spiritual aspect of having the diets and the ceremonies and the ayahuasca to really help people access that stuff. And I found that those three elements providing that really was like, wow, if you just did that, you could do a yoga retreat somewhere, you could do a Vipassana retreat somewhere, a meditation retreat. And it turns out, yeah, extremely impactful on people when they get this retreat in nature and they have a time out and they're part of a community, a healing community, and they also have access to some spiritual practice that is kind of without judgment. So then there's all of that, but then in my book, I get into more like try to explore the medical, the physiology of it all. And my argument is that technology where you have the spirituality is integrated into the medicine practice, whatever that is, that helps create a context, that is, like I said, is transcends judgment. And then you bring nature to guide the experience. So nature being the guide. So this kind of a really like, how do we understand how to live in this time and space on this earth? Well, nature, being like a major guide of how to exist on this planet. So you bring the nature piece and you bring the spirituality piece, you give people a space, a ceremonial space where they can be vulnerable, which they need. They need a place, a time and space to be vulnerable. Maybe they're not getting that at their doctor's office, or they don't feel like it's safe to be vulnerable. And you have to do it safely, right? There's a lot of abuse happening in the Amazon and everywhere else. So if you start abusing people and then you've blown it, you're not going to achieve the results. But if you're able to maintain the integrity of that safety and allow people to be vulnerable, and then you create a sacred space which exists beyond judgment, now they can really process out a lot of things. So that spiritual context now allows for major emotional healing to happen. So this emotional side, the emotional dimension, like I say, the spiritual and emotional dimensions of illness. How do you address those? That's what I think the ancient cultures, their approach seems to be more connected to that, and you see more results. And that's what I talk about in the book, that the major healings that happen across these different illnesses, the consistent link was that they had major emotional healing. And the spiritual context is what allowed them to have a major emotional healing. So I think that's what it is. And I think that's what we can learn, whether we bring just Shipibo shamanism up north or other things. But as we try to learn what's missing in our system, that's what's missing. And so we need to be able to create more, I would say, sacred space. I would take it that far, so that people can go through the kind of emotional processes that they need to go through to get over the wounds of their traumas, of their childhood, of their life, of their ancestors, etc. Like that's a traditional way to approach that stuff all over the planet Earth for millennia, is through ritual.
Yeah, I mean, that really seems like something we've lost. I mean, even if I think about my grandparents' generation, I mean, going to church on Sunday was something you did. Rain, shine, snow, it didn't matter. And that at least seems to really fulfill two of those things the guy was talking about, that sense of community and that sense of spirit, of connecting to something bigger than us. And it does seem like as society progresses and maybe we think we understand things, we actually move away from some of that because a lot of that is not based in necessarily fact or something we can put our finger on. And I think that's something interesting you said is, you know, a lot of, I guess a lot of this work does require a certain leap of faith or, you know, it's not
Or
something.
trust of your feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so that's the other side of this thing. It's like once you lose the heart and soul of it, then yeah, what are we talking about? But if you're all are admitting to like you said, that you can't measure it or put your finger on it or whatever, but it's like, but there we are with our feeling. So like, or can we be honest about how we feel about what's going on, or are we supposed to like reason that away?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the issue. So before, I think in the grandparents' generation, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think there is a lack of spiritual resource for people, you know. Unfortunately, like the materialism of the culture, you know, continues to corrupt. And so there's the not all, but a lot of churches have you know disappointed people with their corruption, and that's moved in the materialism, that's moved in the judgment, that's moved in to those spaces. That these are not spaces, some of them are, but some of them are not spaces where people feel like they can be vulnerable, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that their community is going to support them and love them through the truths of their lives. It's like, oh no, because they did this, oh no, because they did cross that line, oh, they're not welcome here anymore. And so then people don't have that. And then as people lessen more and more ignore this kind of emotional and spiritual realities, the heart and soul of life, I would say, like, you know, the truth is, it's like we're born, we live, we will die. And so the mystical, like, air around that, that I think was a little more alive in our grandparents' generation, now is just like it's being left as just pure material pursuit. It doesn't matter how you feel or, you know, that your integrity or somehow would make you feel better because you could just try to get more money, you know, and that would just deal with everything. Just get the money, you know, and then that'll sort it all out. If you don't feel well, take a pill, you know, use the chemistry is the answer. It's not that you don't feel well, it's your chemistry's off. Just alter the chemistry, you know, or just all this mood altering addiction, you know, whether, okay, it's sex or it's food or it's, you know, pills, it's alcohol, it's drugs. It's all these things that really are just about altering the way we feel about what we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then trying to get back to the core of like, well, what is it like just to feel what we're experiencing? And why are you struggling with that? Why is that hard for you? Is that because your sensibility of feeling what we're experiencing has been impacted negatively by like some series of experiences? Is it because your job, your community, your society, your whole thing is just making you feel very uncomfortable? And so I think that they were like I don't know, that's my imagination, or I can think of my own grandparents. They were just, the world was less dominated by the material. And so they couldn't get away from some of that mystery. It was just still right there, you
Mm-hmm.
know? But now it's like, I think you can figure everything out.
Yeah. You mentioned this idea that potentially a lot of these churches had become corrupted and people lost trust in them. Do you think that's something that separates this plant work? Because many people who come to this plant work, some of them come from a religious background, and there's often this idea that they feel like they connected through plants to what their religion was actually pointing towards, but it was a direct experience. It was something that they realized within themselves rather than someone in a church setting kind of telling them this is how you need to be, or this is what is good, or this is what is bad, and kind of that direct experience of realizing that oneself.
Well, that's what we're trying to get back to, you know, is that whether that's in their own church and their own, you know, Christian experience or whatever experience that is, but help them get back to an original experience and not just, you know, without getting too political, like not just believing that Donald Trump is the chosen one because somebody told me he was, you know? It's like, okay, I guess, but like, what do you really believe? What really resonates with you in your heart of hearts? Like, we want to know about that. And so that's, I think, where when we bring nature back to as part of a source of guiding spirit, there's just a lot more room to, I think, to allow people to really come into themselves and not just be about what somebody's, you know, some dogma or doctrine that they're being told, but it
Mhm.
becomes extremely important. Like, how does that sit with you? You know, what you're hearing. If it sits well with you, okay, you know, let's move forward. Let's keep talking about it. If ayahuasca, you know, is bringing you back to church, beautiful. You know, my mom is Catholic. I grew up Catholic. I don't really, I'm not against people that are Catholic or Catholic church communities. I am against the abuse of the Catholic Church. You know, that's just like profound in its scope, you know, on this earth. So, like, I would like to see more of that addressed. Um, but at the same time, I know that it helped me find spirituality growing up. And for my mom, it's a big source, and the way she deals with it is very inspirational and beautiful. So it's spiritual practice. So that's my thing, is that one of the messages that I'm always repeating is that, you know, and it partially came out of here using ayahuasca here in America, and when you're trying to come up with arguments to demonstrate that we should get religious protection, you know, like some of the other, like the UDV ayahuasca church from Brazil, even for shamanic practice, which a lot of people say, well, that's a medicine practice, that's a healing practice. Like, you can't make that into a church or a religion. But my point is, well, spiritual healing is a spiritual practice, and spiritual practice is spiritual healing. In fact, all spiritual practice, its purpose is to nourish our spiritual well being. So if the spiritual practice you're being asked to participate in are not doing that, then I would have to question the ethics of what you're doing.
Mhm.
Because if it's what you're telling me is a spiritual practice, well then, if it's spiritual practice, well then, by that nature of my understanding of that, then that should be nourishing your spiritual well-being. You should be getting more well, you know, spiritually, reflected in your emotional health. That the spiritual well-being would be reflected in the emotional health. This person wouldn't necessarily be so depressed or requiring, you know, pills to wake up, to go to sleep, to have sex, you know, to digest their food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That they would actually be doing better, that their relationships would be healthier, not less healthy. You know, their relationship with themselves, with their families, with their communities, with their ecosystems, you know, with the universe. would be showing signs of improvement. That would be the measure of the spiritual practice to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's what we need to get back to, some origin. And so the nature guides that way. You know, the nature is just, there it is. It's like, is it a harmonious ecosystem or not?
Well, it's interesting when you mentioned politics that this idea came up because a lot of the Enlightenment principles that, for example, the U.S. was based upon the founding fathers, that there was definitely this idea of looking to nature, that actually when one observed nature, one was able to learn these fundamental principles and these truths, that nature was actually the great teacher. Which is also interesting because that's kind of the third component you were speaking of this African guy. Um, so it's interesting because even in a political point of view, there is this, I think, this idea of going back to nature, that nature does have this tremendous ability to teach. It can actually teach us these universal truths or principles, which we can then stand upon. Because it's
And
even
like, as you
interesting.
mentioned, they've guided things thus far, as you know what you're getting at. Like, those were very influential in creating something like an American democracy.
Mhm. And even this idea, I mean, ayahuasca itself is called vine of the dead, and that's a really common theme in a lot of shamanic work, is this idea of dying or death. And that's certainly, I think, a big principle when we look at nature. We see that everything passes, everything changes. There's cycles, there's rhythms, and that can just be, yeah, I think a tremendous teacher when we do get so caught in our mind and thinking our beliefs are so strong, and this is right and this is wrong and this is good and this is bad. I think a lot of these cultures, like the Shipibo, there is this wisdom in really observing nature, of putting things into perspective too, and realizing these natural cycles and things. So
No, I think
yeah.
that's very real, and that's, I think, a lot of the meditative Eastern traditions definitely, you know, share that kind of patience. And so there is the sustainable cultures of the world, period. That's it. They all have that consciousness. And so it's like ayahuasca. I mean, that's one of the, you know, translations from the Quechua is vine of the dead, or other people say vine of the soul. But anyways, this idea of like the limited lifespan, and also there's something beyond that, you know, indicated at the same time. So this, like, that the two, that we're here and then we die, and what is that, you know, and how does that relate to everybody else that's died, and what does that relate to the future of our soul or our consciousness, or what exists afterwards, or, you know, just, and what is the larger uh, framework in which we exist. And so I think that I was thinking about this the other day, but I think that every, like, sustainable culture, we're talking about like these, like a Shipibo culture, some native culture where they're able to live alongside their ecosystem, including, you know, maybe the Romans. And, you know, I think there was a lot more nature thriving around those cultures. They all have a mystical consciousness. Like, it's regarded at the highest levels of their intellectual whatever pursuits, right? You wouldn't have a Socrates or a Plato or somebody like that, you know, if they didn't regard the metaphysical and the spiritual. It'd be kind of foolish, you know, to have them at the discussion table. And so that went on all the way, supposedly, like, at least in Western culture, till like Isaac Newton, you know, who's a very spiritually oriented person, but his writings that were in his studies that led to a lot of this measuring and kind of getting at the kind of clockwork of the way matter moves and works and everything like that. People really got excited about that, but they kind of forgot, like, he was this spiritual scholar, you know. That was a huge, they said 75% of his writings were about the metaphysical. topics. 25% is what we, are so fascinated by, with the calculus and the optics and all this other stuff, physics. So, I just think they're living alongside nature. You learn that stuff that we're talking about. And if you don't live alongside nature, then you destroy yourself. It's just what we're at risk of doing. And that's where we're at, is just like dropping off, the fool that doesn't want to learn about their relationship with nature and whether or not there's a metaphysical aspect to that.
Do you have any sense of where that split came from? Because like you said, I mean, Newton, he was by my understanding, he was a Freemason. As you said, he was very into the mystical, into the sacred. But even when we talk about these things, like we talk about traditional medicine or shamanism as if it's something different. But at the root, all of these things are the same. I mean, medicine is medicine. You're trying to help someone. Do you have any idea of where that split came from, that it became this very different thing, that we look at these other traditional medicines as being something very foreign?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple like levels of it. Like one of it, Ken Wilber, I had read some of his stuff, and he was talking about how he felt like the split that happened in Europe was like partially just as a reaction to and a rebellion against like the way the church had kind of taken over, monopolized like all thinking. So that there was, okay, so we can have this metaphysical perspective that we say is so important, but then we see this kind of corruption where they're just manipulating all that so much in this imperial structure, to where now you're not allowed to make a discovery that doesn't fit the model. So Galileo and Copernicus and these guys were just observing the world as it is, back to what we were talking about again, like learning from nature. And now the lessons that they get from nature are like, now they're going to kill them because they feel like it's going to disrupt the political order that they've created. So this imperial kind of large scale stuff. So then when they kind of like broke away, Ken Wilber talks about when there was this point, I don't know if it was in the 1800s or when they said, okay, separation of church and state. Like, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not just going to follow whatever the Pope says or whatever the Archbury, what are the Bishop of Canterbury or whoever it is. We're not just going to go along with that anymore. Now there has to be some kind of rationale. Like, why is this? We have a law. We have the law. It speaks for itself. And so then there's the law. And then that art, that they were restricted to religious art. And if anybody was painting outside of that, then that's going to cause a big stink. Somebody's going to get murdered over that. So then you have this irreverence, that's just like, okay, now they're going to show this guy urinating into Jesus's mouth, like that's the piece that I have to do to express myself, to kind of irreverent. And the same was true of, he said, the aesthetic, the legal side, and then the moral side is that we're just going to get away from all the metaphysical stuff because they're using it against us. So his thing is they're just like, just split apart. So just split apart. Science is like, leave God out of this. God's not welcome here. Last time those guys wanted to kill Galileo, they wanted to kill Copernicus simply because we were talking to nature. So leave them out. So there was a growing like political force behind some kind of religious authority that was really, violent. And so when people had a chance to get away from that, and they're like very wary and leery of that, and then there was like attraction that started coming on. And in medicine, there's a famous, like the Flexner report in 1912 in the United States is like this report. It's basically like, whatever their arguments, some people say, oh, that's the pharmaceutical companies, or that's the beginning of that monster. But their argument was against charlatanism, that it's illegal to go around telling people you're this and you're that, because a lot of people will listen to you and they'll take the snake oil. So we need to protect the masses from these charlatans. And so then that started getting mixed up. But then you also had the religious authority also with their political interests, that they already had come up with a system of destroying, nature-based culture that was there before the Romans or whoever it was showed up in Germany, showed up in Sweden, showed up in England, showed up in Spain. Let's eradicate. You can't let these people keep their beliefs going, because it's very hard to control them if you do. This is a tried and true, this has been going on from the Egyptians, and before that, the empires of the millennia have learned that this is how this works. So you have to eradicate the culture as much as possible so that they'll fall in line with the new culture. So there's also that element where there is a major subjugation and destruction of whatever knowledge is there, that is going to be the ancestral knowledge of that land, as it's rooted in the nature of that land, the people who have lived there for many, many generations. But then the foreign invader comes and says, okay, no more of that. And so that's been going on back and forth all over the place, right? Wiping out this, wiping out that. And so that's a huge factor. So in the case of, the Western perspective towards the Amazonian shaman is like, first, there's no science. It's too spiritual. It's too hokey. And then you have all the structural racism, that we talk about, that's starting to get a little more attention more and more. Is like, you've actually been indoctrinated from an early age to not consider this person as a human being. Like, this is kind of an animal. A lot of people seem to carry that in the back of their mind. Number one. Number two, that their intellectual world would be in any way relevant to you. It's like, no. And secondly, like, even if you did have spiritual beliefs, well, these people are diabolical. If I were to admit that I had some spiritual beliefs from growing up in church and some kind of fear in the middle of my God-fearing, kind of whatever, the fabric of my being, like, well, that's the devil right there. He's doing everything they told me that I was not supposed to do. And turns out it's like, well, that's what they've been doing with the witches and all those things for thousands of years. So there's a lot of baggage is what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. And so we still, I was invited to speak to this guy. I was talking to this guy from Horizons just a few days ago. They were inviting me, like, do I want to be part of this thing? So he was trying to ask me about like this whole thing about the Amazonian shamans and how the neo shamans and people have all these, like they're, how do people reconcile the sorcery and the this and the that and the animism and, all these things. And I was like, well, man, what I have to say is like, what you're describing about Amazonian shamanism, like very superficial, extremely superficial. And I will have to go as far as to say, like, wrapped up in the structural racism that is like starting to get a lot more attention in the modern dialogue. It's like, just the way you talk about it right now, it's like, why wouldn't, and I just flip the example. I was like, well, when the Amazonian shaman is presented with some, malaria medication, the modern one, the one from 2020, that's had some experience with the global culture. It's like, they're like, yeah, that probably is going to work on me because I'm a human being, I have like the same chemistry and physiology in my body. So yeah, I might try that. But then, when the other side, when they hear about the plant medicine, oh no, you have to believe in that culture and you have to believe in this. And if you don't, if you're not from there and you're not part of that, if you're not on the Kool-Aid, that's not going to work on you. That's just juju. And it's like, but then you and I have both seen people come from all over the world to receive healing from these Shipibo people, to many cultures, and to people, very rational people, many of them, who don't believe in anything. And then they got a result. So why is it so hard to see on the other side of that? Mm-hmm. And is it because you were raised to believe that that person has no real value. You know, is it because you just have a hard time relating to that person as a fellow human being? Is that what it is? Because, you know, as a Colombian American, yeah, it feels like that a lot of times, that that's what it is. They don't raise those
Yeah.
questions about the Europeans.
Hmm. I mean yeah, I think all of that is super valid. I mean, do you think there's maybe another side to that too? I was reminded, I think it was Ben, who's the head of ICEERS. He said something really poignant, which is that when the Europeans came to the Americas 400 or 500 years ago, the indigenous people were too indigenous. They needed to be more European. But also more and more as we evolve, he's saying there's this other idea, which is sometimes we look the opposite now. We say the indigenous people are too European. They need to be more indigenous. And it's kind of that same
Yeah, cartoon
patronizing,
character. Yeah,
right. And what you said, I think, is super important, is that we seem to have gotten away from just looking at people as humans, that a human is a human. We come from different
yeah.
cultures, we have different beliefs and ways of seeing things, but at the end of the day, we're a human. And so, of course, if Western medicine works on a human, then it's going to work on someone outside that culture, just as if plant medicine works on a Shipibo, it's going to work on someone outside that culture as well.
And you know, there is nuance to that, and there is, you
For
know,
sure.
people that believe in it more and all that stuff, and you know, the influence of those things. But the core thing about the shared humanity is like, if we can get to that place, then it's a lot easier to, you know, it's these schools of thought uh, are not as difficult to overcome when I treat the other person like a real human being.
Hmm. Something also that came to mind when you were talking was kind of this Chinese principle of the I Ching, or the yin and the yang, this idea of sometimes there's a place of rest and sometimes there's a place of action, or, you know, there's certain things that are manifest and there's certain things that are unmanifest. And it seems like when you were talking, this more maybe Western way of looking at something is very much this manifest, reduction, you know, trial and error, seeing what works, what's real, what's tangible, what we can, you know, put our mind on and get a result. But something you mentioned earlier with this Shipibo way of working is there's also something almost intangible about it. There's something that requires a trust, something that's maybe beyond the mind, something that maybe we'll never be able to explain. So what do you think is that
But we
balance
experience, yeah,
that we
there needs to be,
experience?
yeah, I think there needs to be a balance, and I think there is such a thing as, you know, he's talking about these different sides of like, oh, them being too indigenous or too, you know, it's this, that's this, you're there in the heartland of this prophecy of the eagle and the condor, right? That, are you familiar with this? That
Hmm.
this prophecy of the eagle and the condor, and ultimately it's kind of about, like, to simplify it, is using the path of heart and mind, and that they need to fly together. And so if we're just purely intellectual, like in that, you know, story, the ego side is overly intellectual, overly materialistic, overly reductionist, overly masculine, perhaps some people would say, and less interested in nature, less interested in spirituality. Then you have this condor side, which is more interested in nature, less intellectual, more interested in intuition, more heart centered, more heart focused, more perhaps more feminine, you know, under some kind of relative, like, uh, description. So the idea is that we need to have a balance between those things, and that they're out of balance. And so we're working towards a balance. And so in the prophecy, according to the prophecy, the balance really started falling off in the 1490s when the Europeans came. So the condor, the eagle culture comes, let's say in this version of it, to greet the condor people. And they, you know, they dominate. They're, unfortunately, you know, the disease really decimates so much of the Native American culture. And then you have all these other situations where the European culture, and there's a whole book, Guns, Germs, and Steel is a really interesting book about that, right? About what technological advantages, et cetera, led to this situation. So then you subjugate that kind of knowledge that they have, to have the Machu Picchu and all the beauty that you're sitting in right now over there, and the wisdom of this, this energy healing from the icaros, or the wachuma stuff, or the ayahuasca information that is being kind of left in these places where we know the Europeans struggled to exist. When the temperate climates, they're going to take over southern Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, and a lot, big parts of Peru and Colombia. But in the high Andes and deep in the jungle, it's tougher. It's tougher to really take over there. And so these 500 years pass by, and there's this immense suffering of the Native American culture. But over the course of that time, there's also an increasing suffering in the so-called eagle, path of the eagle. The overly intellectualized, overly materialistic society starts to run into real problems. And the culmination, according to the prophecy of the problem, would be the global ecological crisis. So that would be the first major red flag of something is really not functioning well. And then you have the added burden on this path of the eagle that they are feeling increasingly alienated from themselves, from their communities, from nature. Increasing rates of mental health problems in the so-called developed world, Europe, North America, to the point that the United States is consuming more, psychiatric medication than I think anywhere in the world. And that all these people start showing up to Peru, asking for help. And so then the condor people, as we say, still grieving their losses, not completely, not just saying that they're over it, grieving the continued loss of their culture and the tragedy that is, but also seeing that the way to move forward is to share again and not to just be resentful about what's happened. So they start sharing. And so the heart, lets go of resentment to a degree, invites forgiveness to a degree, and reaches, to the mind for all the, guidance and organizing and planning and everything that is available there to start working together, to start flying together again. And so that's kind of what's going on. I think to me, it's a beautiful metaphor or legend or belief, prophecy. So I believe that we're part of that. And it inspires me to think that we're part of that. It's how can we learn from each other? How can, we don't need to forget about Western science just because we're studying ayahuasca with Shipibos in the Amazon. No one's asking us to let that go. At the same time, just because I'm a Western scientific doctor doesn't mean that I should deny how I feel in my heart about my life, about the way I was treated in medical school or the way things function in a, healthcare system. Just go along with it because, it's good money. And I'm supposed to just go, well, what if that's not satisfying to me? What if I don't feel good about that? What if I can't sleep well? What if I can't enjoy my life? Then what about that? The money's not cutting it. The new technology, the new invention is not cutting it. So we have to get back to some heart and soul. So this is the time for the cultures to learn from each other as much as they can, and with as much respect as they can have for each other. And the key to that, once again, is this humanity, and recognize that the dehumanization of either side is part of a dark, traumatic history.
I was looking at your website, and it looks like you're working on a fairly new project at Modern Spirit. Is that the name of it?
That's right.
And that's looking into the epigenetics of this work.
Yeah, so Modern Spirit, just along the lines of everything we've been talking about, is a nonprofit dedicated to demonstrating the value of spiritual healing in modern healthcare. And so there's two major projects that are coming out of Modern Spirit right now. One of them is the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project. So when we saw like what you've seen, what I've seen, like these big transformative healings happen in the Amazon with many, many people, problems that they were supposed to not ever get better, or they're screwed for life, et cetera, et cetera. But then 2 weeks with some Shipibos, and all of a sudden, things are really looking up. And so this kind of level of transformative healing, especially like in the cases that I talk about in my book, where these are so-called medical diagnoses of, severe PTSD from sexual abuse, or this addiction problem, or this depression, this anxiety, and then even some physical problems. So we were looking, because I got into this idea of epigenetics, that this would be kind of a part of the physiology. My thing was that if we're seeing these people heal from their emotional stuff, and that's where the big transformation is happening, then let's focus on their emotional biology. That's what they share. So then what can we say about emotional biology? What do we learn about that? And what's the biochemistry of that? And so I was learning more and more about epigenetics and the way emotional trauma can imprint our epigenetics, affect the way our genes are expressed, and that epigenetics could also be changed, that there's a software component to it, not a hardware, that could, what looks like a genetic illness, somebody from Vietnam vet PTSD for 40 years, that could actually improve. We thought that was just like locked into their system. But no, there's an aspect that's more malleable than we thought. So that was this epigenetics thing. And so we wanted to do epigenetics research with ayahuasca down in Peru, but it was a little difficult to manage. And so then we saw the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy trial that MAPS has been running. And we have friends that were connected to them. And we asked them, hey, what if we studied the epigenetics of that? Because we're seeing a lot of transformative healings from that. People with chronic treatment-resistant PTSD having these big kind of miraculous healings from their intervention with MDMA. So we collect saliva samples before and after, and we look for epigenetic changes around the kind of genes that are known to be associated with PTSD, like cortisol receptor and things like that. So we managed to pull that off. We raised enough money. The idea came to me through ayahuasca, the idea to be involved in this. Other people also were inspired to be part of it for different reasons. As part of the book is that story and presenting that argument. And so we managed to do it. So we have COVID held the MAPS trial. So we have 23 pre and post saliva samples, but we have them in the lab right now. And we're about to run them this week to see if we can see that kind of change. So for us, it's like a big deal trying to find the intersection, like I say, between biology, emotion, and spirituality. Where people's emotional lives and their sense of personal meaning interact with their biochemistry, and the way that we can work with people at that level. And so whatever we learn from this, maybe we don't find anything. If we find something, it's probably going to be a big deal. It'd really be demonstrating something about the power of emotional healing, the power of spiritual healing, and its effect on the actual material world. So bridging that. So then I have the River course, which is a course based on my book. It's an 8-week course expounding upon the ideas of the book for primarily healthcare providers, which includes doctors, therapists, and ceremonialists. And then there are a few other people that are squeezing their way in there, artists and lawyers and stuff like that. And so we're gonna do an 8-week course where I kind of expound on the book over 8 weeks, but then there's a lot of guided discussion and dialogue to try to get these cohort 25 people to share ideas, and like, how can we've all had these experiences, how are we going to bring this spiritual and energetic work into our practice? Not just by learning diets and shamanism, but whatever that is. What does that mean to you? And so that's the river course. So they're both available, modernspirit.org. We've got the crowd fund for the study, the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project, and you can find out how to register for the river course. So yeah, those are my projects with Modern Spirit. That's my thing. Very inspired by ayahuasca, I have to say. And Niue Rao, this is a big reason that I'm doing all the things that I'm doing. So now we're also, Modern Spirit's going to help raise some money for Niue Rao in the COVID period. So that's also there. It'll be available through the Niue Rao website to help them get through this blockade that keeps you in Pisac.
I interviewed a friend of mine, and she's a psychologist, and she's actually in that MAPS program with the MDMA psychedelic assisted therapy. And I think she was saying something like, I forget the length of time, maybe after a year, 2/3 experiencing no symptoms of PTSD. I mean, that's pretty staggering results. Yeah.
Staggering. It's groundbreaking. So the average from the studies that we've collected on, like the average duration of treatment-resistant PTSD is like 17 years, 18 years, almost 2 decades. Like 2 decades, you've had PTSD, nothing's helped. Then you go through this 12-week intervention with therapy, several therapy sessions, then MDMA session with the therapist, therapy, MDMA, therapy, 3 MDMAs, and then all this 12 weeks of support. And 1 year after that, yeah, there are like 66%, or even it climbs like towards 70%, no longer meet criteria for PTSD. So that's the kind of transformative healing that psychedelic psychotherapy is demonstrating in the MAPS trial. And that's the kind of stuff that I saw, with Shipibo. Not every time necessarily, but with the right situation, yes, I did see things like that. That would seem very miraculous at the time. So yeah, I'm teaming up with them, Modern Spirits, teaming up with MAPS. I mean, MAPS is the parent study of this, so they're supporting it. They're giving us the saliva, letting us test it, and then USC is the home of this study. My friend Rael Khan. Candace Lewis is the epigeneticist, based here in Phoenix, actually downtown Phoenix, TGen. So it's a pretty cool project. Yeah. So all these projects have come out of, I know I'm going to wrap it up here soon, but my humble study with Shipibo shamans, how we started. So the reason that I'm doing everything that I'm doing, what I just described, is because I said, wow, these guys are really doing something down here. And you know what? I think I want to study with these guys. And they're studying with the plants, with direct access to nature. Personal access to nature is the big focus. So I want to do that. And so I committed myself to that, and I went through the apprenticeship, and I run ceremony and all that kind of stuff. But it has opened the doors to like so many awesome projects. Because for me, it was always, like I said, as a Colombian, it was very easy for me to accept their humanity and speak to them, and be able to exchange and joke around and get to know them and realize, well, these guys they really know something. And to hang out and then them to give me that kind of care and love and respect and say, yeah, Joe, come on, I'll teach you something. I can see you look a little lost. You look like you're longing for something. Come on, we'll help you, don't worry. And so they helped me. And so that was my journey of like eagle on the condor. So now that's what I'm about,
Do you see kind of your future that's going to be your path is bridging these things and trying to?
I think so. I think my path, what I've come to, like, like you, like us, that we're just exploring the who knows what, the frontiers of whatever what we're drawn to. But to me, I'm trying to get some kind of clearer picture, some culmination. And so what I've come to in the last little while that's satisfying to me, especially after leaving Niue Rao and just feeling kind of really lost, like what's next? Why do you go from that to what's after that? And so, yeah, okay, running ceremony and doing that side of thing, working as a healer. There's still the doctor work to fall back on and learn more about. So for me, it's about like three things right now. It's like it's it's being an educator. I like teaching and the book and the course, and it's all about that. And the research is just like supplementing that, like expanding the knowledge, the education, the bridge work. Then doctor as a doctor, working with people a little bit as a doctor and a physician, learning about that world, and then as a healer in ceremony. And so those three things, like to me, they play off of each other. And so I've decided those are the three things. That's how I'm going to define myself, is that I'm into those three things. And so then, and I want to bring that, it's over the top, but I still want to bring like this kind of education that I'm doing here in English to South America, to Colombia and to Peru, in Spanish, to psychiatrists and doctors there, because I think there's going to be a lot more traction for the plant medicine down there. Mm-hmm. And so it's healing those wounds of why doesn't the Peruvian doctor talk to the Peruvian shaman? Why doesn't the Colombian psychiatrist talk to the Colombian shaman? And so all this work that we're doing in America to try to bridge this language and come up with these ways to overcome the baggage of our past and then bring it there so that the plants can, have a louder voice. So indigenous culture can have more of a voice and just bring more dignity to all humanity.
Well, cool, Joe. Well, we're coming up on 90 minutes. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or go into?
No, that's the main thing. I just encourage people to check it out, modernspirit.org, to learn about what we're doing, to consider donating to the crowd fund to support the research project with the epigenetics. And then, now the river course, which it's filling up. but I want to keep doing it. I'm going to look for more people. I am singing some icaros as part of the class. I'm not trying to teach people, and making it clear it's not a place to come learn about shamanism, but I want to share about the energetics of it and talk about it. So there's that element too.
Cool. Well, I'll put all those up on the show notes.
Thank you.
The question I usually end the podcast with, it's a big question, but it's what do you think these plants are pointing towards? What do you think they're trying to teach us?
I think they're trying to teach us, many, many, many things. And so it's just like it's trying to teach us how to be more whole and how to be more at home, on this earth, in ourselves and on this earth.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Great.
But I'm like, for you, just want to bring it up. I think you're an excellent podcast host. I've been on a lot of podcasts. So maybe it's teaching you to do podcasts. No, I really think you're doing a great job, Jason. It was really
cheers.
cool.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, it's interesting because it was something I had wanted to do for a long time, just to get people like yourself, like the shamans, the Shipibo facilitators a voice, because I don't think there are a lot of people really talking about this work who are really do it, who are on the ground kind of doing it day in and day out. So, but I never had a chance because, like you, I was working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's really because of COVID that it's happened. So, we'll see what comes of it.
No, it's good. I like it.
Yeah, but having said that, I'm itching to get back to work. So I'm hoping the lockdown is going to end sooner than later. But
that seems like it.
Well, Joe, I appreciate it so much, and it's always good talking to you. And I hope some people reach out to you because of this, and hopefully we'll get you back on soon. I'm sure there's infinite things we could talk about.
That sounds good. That sounds good, Jason.
All right, brother. Well, take care of yourself.
All right, you too. All right, man. Have a good day.
So that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. I've got some good guests coming up. Marta, who's a friend of mine and a yoga teacher, she's going to be coming on. I'm hoping to bring on again Lila, the Shipibo Curandero who I work with, and hopefully her sister as well, Laura. Also my friend Tanya, and her partner, whose name is Romulo. He's a Shipibo Curandero. I have a tremendous respect for both of them, so that should be really good. And hopefully my friend Marav, who works with tobacco. So a lot of good shows coming up. As always, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, go on Apple Podcasts, leave a star rating and a review. That really helps to support this show. And again, if you're able to support financially through Patreon, that's a really big help. You can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. And one of the really good tiers is just over $1 an episode, and that gives you access to a lot of additional material. So thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next episode.